Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up? Cool. All right. As we get closer to the end of the year, we begin thinking about spending time with friends and family, taking the last of our vacation days, and big holiday dinners. Today I'm going to share with you my story of the first time I tried to make a big Thanksgiving dinner. So in the week leading up to Thanksgiving, I did all the basic steps. I found some recipes that I liked. I came up with a list of ingredients, made a rough estimate for how much time I needed, and hit the store to pick up the groceries. When it was time to start cooking, I launched into meal prep mode, and I was a blur of cutting and chopping, peeling and slicing. And after several hours of hard work, I took a step back to survey my handiwork. Before me was a battlefield of dirty dishes and disappointment. What happened? Well, I tried to make a little bit of progress on each recipe before switching to the next, but as I began juggling more and more recipes, I kept getting distracted by timers going off and just being randomized all over the place. If I had just taken the time beforehand to prepare my ingredients, consolidate similar steps, and even just plan out my oven and stove time better, the meal probably would have turned out a lot better. In a lot of ways, data analysis is like cooking a big Thanksgiving dinner. If you just explore your data, uh, consolidate similar data sources, and just understand any outliers, you have a better chance of staying in your analytic flow and deriving real insight. Today I'm going to share with you Tableau Prep Builder, a powerful tool to help you clean, combine, and reshape your data. Let's get started. So a little bit about me. My educational background is in electrical engineering, computer science, and math. Before Tableau, I worked at a company that designs and manufactures RFID technology, so RFID readers and the little RFID tags in your badges. Suffice to say, I'm pretty comfortable working with millions and billions of rows of data, so Tableau is a perfect fit for me. And since I've been at Tableau for about 5 years now, I've worked on the big data, data prep, Tableau Prep Builder and Conductor, and most recently data catalog teams. And one silly fact about me is when I'm not hard at work on your features, I like to unwind by playing foosball. And I always thought I was pretty good, but my colleagues who play on the same team as me started keeping track and decided to help me see and understand how that might not be the case, and it turns out I might not know what I'm doing. All right. Some stuff about you, not to put you on the spot. It's important that you're here. You pick the best talk of the conference. It would be best if you are familiar with operations like joins and unions, aggregates and pivots, but it's not essentially necessary. This is just an introduction talk. If there's any calculations or operations that you see here today and you want to learn more, feel free to come visit us in the data village, and we have people who would be happy to show all that stuff to you. Also, bonus points if you can relate to the agony of cooking a big holiday dinner. The data set I'll be using today is actually even more Thanksgiving recipes. I'm going to try and clean all that up to prepare for Thanksgiving this year, and we'll see what comes out the other side. The agenda, so we covered the about me. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what Tableau Prep is, and then we'll go through the different stages of Tableau Prep, so exploring your data, cleaning, integrating, which would be joins and unions, then reshaping, which would be pivoting and aggregating your data, sharing your data, so just writing out your data to flat files like CSV or optimized, optimized hyperfiles, and then some resources in case you want to learn more. All right. While Tableau has been around for a while, helping people see and understand their data, seeing and understanding your data isn't all there is to the data analysis pipeline. There's also data preparation. Some studies show that data analysts spend as much as 80% of their time preparing their data, and only 20% of their time analyzing it. We here at Tableau saw an opportunity to bring Tableau's innovative interactivity to the data preparation arena, and so Tableau Prep Builder was conceived. Prep Builder helps people clean, combine, and reshape their data. Let's take a look at it. Nice. All right, so this is the start screen you see when you first open up the product. Real quick show of hands, how many people have used Tableau Desktop before? Nice. So a bit of this might look familiar. On the right-hand side, you have the Discover pane, which has resources in case you want to learn more and other just educational resources. In the center here, you see the recently opened flows, kind of like in Tableau Desktop, as well as sample flows in case you just want to see what a complex flow is capable of. And on the right-hand side is that familiar connections pane. We're just going to look at a sample flow to get started. So the first thing we see is this flow pane. The flow pane is a canvas, much like in Tableau Desktop, where you can interact with your data and visually build your flow. In Prep Builder, preparing data is done by building a flow made up of steps such as input steps, which are these guys. That's where you would connect to data like flat files or databases. Cleaning steps, also unions, joins, and aggregations and pivots, as well as output steps here at the end. I'm going to click on a cleaning step. So I'm going to click on an input step. And this is the step where you see all the information about your data after you bring it in. So you'll see all the fields in your input data, their field types, so whether they're numbers or strings by default, and you can configure them here by clicking on them and changing their type. You also see some sample some figure how the ingested, like sampling your data input. Cool. Step. Cleaning step. So the next step I'm going to show you is where all the magic happens. Most of the magic happens, and this is the profile pane. Builder shows you the structure of your data, summarizing field values into bins, so you can quickly see related values and spot outliers. To see related values for a given field, you would just click on one of these summaries of your data, and it will highlight the value you clicked, as well as all related values in the remaining fields. It shows you the relationship distribution of the selected value across all of your data. If a discrete data field has a distribution that is too large to show just on one screen, we also provide this thing called a visual scroll bar, which is kind of not a mini-map, but a high-level summary, which you can also use to explore your data just by clicking around. And each field in this profile pane has a drop-down menu, which shows you all the available data cleaning operations available at that step for that data field type. And finally, below the profile pane is the data grid, which is just a raw spreadsheet view of your raw data, in case at any point in your flow you just want to see what your actual data looks like, not summarized in any way. Let's say you're cleaning your data and you made a lot of changes and you're not quite sure. Can everyone hear? Okay, 1 second. It's all planned. You could hear that. Now? Better? Oh, nice. All right, cool. It's a profile pane. You have some options. There's a drop-down menu that shows the cleaning operations available for you for that field. Cool. And then the data grid beneath that shows the spreadsheet view, which is your raw values for that step at that point in your flow. Let's say you made a lot of changes. You're not sure what you did. You want to maybe undo some of them or edit some calculations. One last pane I want to show you is the changes pane over here. And this shows you all the changes you made on that step in the flow, and you can remove them, reorder them, edit them, and just see them, which is quite useful, I find. And then I checked in before. It seems like everybody is pretty familiar with Tableau Desktop. One of my favorite features of Prep Builder is you can click on any step in your flow, right-click and select Preview in Tableau Desktop. Prep Builder will pull your data just at that point into Tableau, open an instance of Tableau so you can kind of mess around and see how that data might play out in Tableau. Just a quick sneak preview. It's not meant for actual analysis. When you're actually analyzing your data, you really want to export your data first, but it's a very useful tool. And that is our tour of Prep Builder. Let's see how we did. Cool. Yeah, so we covered the connections pane, which is that pane on the left side, similar to Tableau. We covered the flow pane, which is that canvas that shows all your steps. The profile pane, which is the summarized distribution in the middle. The data grid, which is the raw spreadsheet view at the bottom. The changes pane, which shows all the changes you made on a given step. And Preview in Tableau Desktop, my favorite feature. One pitfall is sometimes people get too hooked into Prep Builder and they really want to do all their analysis there. Again, Prep Builder is mainly for data preparation. Try and save your analysis for Tableau Desktop. All right. Time to explore the data. So, I have a bunch of Thanksgiving recipes. I have two directories of recipes, one for meals, which are important, and one for desserts, which are more important, and also one file with all the ratings for these recipes. I've scraped these from a bunch of online websites, so that's why they're in a bunch of different files in each directory, and we're just going to start by connecting to one of the recipes in the meal directory. So, sorry, let me tell you what I'm doing here. Just like in Tableau Desktop, I'm going to click Connect to Data, and then select a text file. Navigate to where my files are, so here's the dessert recipes, meal recipes, and ratings. I'm going to go to meal recipes, and just select the first recipe I see. And right away we see that input pane that I was talking about, maybe. The input pane that I was talking about with all the fields, looks like we have recipe title, cook time, servings, allergens, that's important. I have a friend who has a peanut allergy. We'll do something about that. This all looks good. What about these other options? In Prep Builder, you have the option to perform an input union as your input step. So you saw I had a lot of recipe files in that directory. Instead of adding them one at a time, I have the ability to add them all at the same time by specifying a regular expression to match the file names against. So I'm going to do that by selecting wildcard union. This shows me, by default, it pulls in all the files in the directory that I'm currently in. And it looks like I definitely want all the recipes, but I don't want that readme.txt file. So I'm going to specify the files have to end in CSV. Oops, that's, yeah. And it looks like now instead of 14 files, I have 13 files, no text file. I'm going to apply that. And actually, before I apply that, you can see the icon for the input step is just a single file. And notice after I apply it, it changes to a plus sign, which signifies an input union. Multiple files are bringing in the same input step. Cool. One other input option I could configure is data sampling. To maintain peak performance, Prep Builder limits the data included in the flow to a representative sample of your data. This helps to speed things along while you're actually building your flow, but when you actually output the data, we pull out all the data to wherever you publish your data or save locally. So we only do this for very large file sizes, usually above 1 million rows, because I only have a few hundred recipes in the example I'm going to show today. Sampling won't be an issue that we hit. This is what the sampling tab looks like and where you can configure it. The next gotcha I'm going to tell you about is that sometimes you'll be exploring your data and you'll really be expecting to see a certain client name or a certain field in your data, but you don't see it. Just know that sampling could be the cause, and if you want to make sure it's not or it is sampling or it's not, just turn off sampling in the input step and see if you can see the value you're looking for. Cool. So we're still exploring our data. I'm going to do that by adding a cleaning step now. Cleaning step is a basic step that lets you see the state of your data and perform a variety of cleaning actions. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm looking at these recipe titles and they look pretty good. Avocado salad, sure, but I don't see any turkey recipes, and that's the most important part of Thanksgiving. Let's just search the values real quick and make sure that there's turkey values. I do that by clicking on this search icon, typing in turkey, and it looks like, yep, I have 17 turkey recipes, plenty of options there. Um, So one thing about the profile pane that I wanted to mention is that on any step besides the input step, you can see how many fields and rows are in your data at that given step in the upper left corner of the profile pane. So I can tell right now, after bringing in all the meal recipes, I have 161 meal recipes and they have 13 fields among them. All right. One last thing I want to explore real quick is the complexity. I don't want to pick out any really hard recipes to make, and I know there's a field in these recipe files that's complexity, and I kind of want to sort to see which are the hardest recipes to make. The next gotcha is sorting. By default, Prep Builder sorts by frequency, which is different than sorting by the actual value or the domain. So if I click this, you'll see 3.7, 2.9. They're not in a numerical order, but how many counts of 3.7 or counts of 2.9 they are. Just the gotcha is to be aware of how you're sorting in Prep Builder, and if the numbers look a little bit wonky, you're probably sorting by a way you don't expect. And it looks like the hardest recipes are turkey roulade, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, spice rub turkey, and cornbread, which doesn't seem that hard to make, but I've never made cornbread. And that is exploring your data. All right, so we covered just searching, sorting, kind of maybe identifying outliers. If you aren't seeing values that you expect to show up in your data, sampling may be the cause. Try turning it off and searching again. And sometimes the sort button doesn't do what you expect. Just know that there's different ways to sort in Prep Builder and know which way you're using. All right, my favorite stage, the cleaning stage. This is where the magic happens. So right away, I mentioned that I have a friend with a peanut allergy. I want to get rid of all the recipes that contain peanuts. So I'm going to go to this allergens field. I'm going to search for peanuts. Looks like there's 11 different categories that contain peanuts. I'm just going to select them all, like this, and then right-click and exclude them. Remember earlier we looked at a summary of how many rows and fields we have. We still have 13 fields, but instead of 161 rows, we now have 131. That means there were about 30 recipes that had peanuts in them. Next, I'm going to show you this cool feature called recommendations. Sometimes it can be hard to know what cleaning operation you want to do. Prep Builder kind of looks at your data and comes up with some ideas for you. So, yeah, right now it looked at all my fields and suggested these two cleaning operations might be useful for me, and it's up to me to decide whether I want to do that. Looks like it wants me to change this recipe URL field, change the data role to URL. For those of you who aren't familiar, a data role is a way to tell Prep Builder a bit about your data. So I would be telling Prep Builder that this field is URLs, and any values in this field that don't conform to a URL format aren't valid. It'll automatically flag those as outliers instead of me having to kind of scroll through or find them another way. So if I do that, it looks like it shows you a preview of the valid values, as well as it already found one invalid value. And it's flagged it here. I'm going to fix this by just double-clicking on the erroneous value and making it conform to a URL by adding the HTTP www prefix. Nice. Next thing that I saw when I was exploring my data is that these recipe type fields look a little bit wonky. It looks like some of the recipes list appetizers, main courses, that makes sense, but sides and side dishes should be the same category. Starter and starters should be the same category. I could manually select these and group them together, Or Prep Builder provides what's known as a fuzzy clustering algorithm, so group and replace algorithms, to use a little bit of AI or algorithms to group things together. You access those by using the drop-down menu I talked about, going to group and replace, and I'm going to use pronunciation. And automatically you're provided with this slider about, you can adjust how fine or how coarse the grouping is. Right now it automatically picked up starter, and we can see in that group it's grouping starter and starters. That's definitely what I want. If I make it a little bit coarser grouping, it didn't pick up anything new. If I made it the most coarse, ooh, it looked like it picked up too much. It picked up starters, starters, and side dishes. That's not what I want. The next gotcha is that the fuzzy clustering algorithms are intelligent, but they're not better than you knowing your data. So always be aware of how the groupings are acting, and group as much as you think you need, but not too much. Then just go back and group manually. So I'm just going to group side and side dishes manually by selecting them, group values, and now the recipe types look good. All right. So if you remember my story, I kind of, when I was trying to make Thanksgiving dinner, I got caught up with too many things, but I also kind of ran out of time. I want to know which recipes take the most amount of time. And normally I would just sort on this cook time field, but it looks like it's a bunch of strings. I need to convert this from hours and minutes to just minutes. How am I going to do that? I'm going to split the fields and then create a calculated field for just the minutes. So I'm going to use the drop down, automatically split values, automatic split. And it looked like it splits it into 2 columns. I'm guessing that these are hours and minutes, but let's make sure. If I select 0 hours and 38 minutes before the split, it looks like split 1 is 0, split 2 is 38 minutes. How about 1 hour and 35 minutes? Split 1 is 1 hour, split 2 is 35 minutes. That looks about right. I'm going to rename this first column to hours, second column to minutes, and then I'm going to create a calculated field. There's a bunch of ways to do it. You can click this menu up here. You can also select one of the fields and go to create calculated field. I'm going to call this total cook times, and the calculation should be, I hope, hours times 60 plus the number of minutes. Actually, before I do that, I know that to create a calculated field that involves math, I need to convert these data types to integers or decimals. So I'm going to just change these to numbers real quick. That way the calculated field won't get mad at me. Now, I'm going to remove these fields as they're no longer necessary. And right away we can see there's this outlier down here. I'm going to click on that one. 1,200 minutes. Way too long. Was my calculation wrong? No, cook time says 20 hours and 5 minutes. I think the recipe online was wrong. And given that this recipe is for Brussels sprouts, I'm just going to exclude that. Cool, no Brussels sprouts. And now we have a normal distribution. Some of the longest recipes are for potato casserole, stuffed mushrooms. Great. So we made a lot of changes. I can't remember everything I did. Luckily we have this changes pane. I can scroll down and look up, and it looks like I did a lot of stuff. But what if I save this off and come back, let's say, I don't know, the day before Thanksgiving, or gave it off to someone else to use in the meantime? How would they know everything I did? The next gotcha is sometimes you can't remember what you did in a flow, and it's very useful to add descriptions to either the step you performed something in, or you can even add descriptions to changes in your changes pane. So for instance, right here in this calculated field where I calculated the total minutes, I'm going to add a description and say calculated total minutes. And even in the flow pane, I'm going to rename the step to cleaned meal recipes by double-clicking on the title. Rename this one to all meal recipes and add a description to clean meal recipes that says remove peanuts and calculated total time in minutes. Cool. So in review, that was cleaning. We covered splits, adding fields, renaming fields, removing fields, calculated fields to get the total amount of cook time, grouping and replacing, which uses fuzzy clustering algorithms. And the gotcha is sometimes it's hard to remember what you did, especially coming back a month later, and grouping fields might not give you exactly what you want, so group in a very general sense and then refine as necessary manually. All right. Integrating your data, unions and joins. So I have not forgotten about the dessert recipes. Let's bring those in. So I'm going to bring it in the same way that I brought in the meals. Going to just select one of them. I'm going to, the data looks good, roughly the same columns. And I'm going to perform that wildcard union. Make sure I don't get that CSV file. Looks good, click apply. All right, now I have an option. I could do all those same cleaning steps, which seems like a lot of work, or I could union my original recipe and then rewire my flow to just point the cleaning step to the unioned step. So for those of you who aren't familiar with unions, unions are a way of combining your data by appending rows from one table on top of another. Usually this works best when the two inputs you're unioning have all the same fields and data types. If you don't have all the same fields, you get what's known as a jagged union, and you kind of have to reconcile those mismatched fields before you continue. Otherwise, you're going to get some unexpected fields in your data. So to union a field, I have two ways of doing it. I can click on this plus, which shows you all the additional steps you can create from that step I just clicked on. So you can see I had the cleaning step, which I created earlier, aggregates, pivots, joins, unions, and output. I won't be covering scripts today, but there is another talk which I'll review at the end, which does cover scripting. So I can either click that plus, or I prefer, like visually, just dragging it on top of the union and selecting, dragging it on top of the union target. I'm going to rename this to all dessert recipes. And yeah, it looked like the union worked, but I want to see what kind of didn't work. I want to see those mismatched fields. To do that, Prep Builder provides a very easy option right here, show mismatched fields. And clicking on that will show me that it looks like food class and wine pairing were in the meal recipes, and dessert class and sweet score were in the dessert recipes. I think food class and dessert class need to be merged together. They're the same field to me. So I'm just going to call this recipe class and merge the two fields together by dragging one on top of the other. Now they're not mismatched anymore and they disappear. The remaining fields, wine pairing and sweet score, I don't really want to do anything with them. I'm just going to leave that data there. And in my analysis I can use it if I want to. Now to rewire the cleaning step that we did earlier, you can move steps anywhere in the flow pane that you see an orange box pop up. So I'm just going to move it after the union step. I'm going to remove this wiring between steps and drag this union step onto the cleaning step. And now all the desserts and all the meal recipes are cleaned, and it looks like I have 167 meal and dessert recipes total. Cool. The last file I want to bring in is the ratings for all the recipes. There's going to be a lot of ratings because it's not just for Thanksgiving recipes like the recipes I scraped. So I'm going to join that list of ratings to the recipes I did select to hopefully get some info that will help me in my analysis. I'm just going to bring it in by selecting it as a file and I'm going to join it. A lot of you have used Tableau before, so it's likely that you're pretty familiar with joins, but if you're not, joins are a way of combining two different data sets on some fields that they have in common. In this case, the ratings file and my recipes file both have recipe titles in common, so that's what I'll be joining on, and I perform a join in my same preferred way by dragging it on top of the combined and cleaned meal recipes onto the join drop target. So sometimes, if there's enough information in your data, Prep Builder will try and guess what fields are in common and add those as join clauses for you. It looks like in the ratings file, it chose recipe as the join field, but in my recipe file, it tried to join with recipe URL. I know that's not right. I know it should be recipe title. So to change what it's joining on, I'm just going to click this. I can see all the files in both inputs and change it to recipe title. Now, if I look at my join summary on the left here, I can see that all 167 recipes that I provided from my cleaned recipe input were joined with at least 167 ratings, so that looks pretty good. For those of you who are fans of modifying your joins, it's possible to change the join type by selecting different parts of the Venn diagram here. And even if you aren't familiar with joins and you're not quite sure what type of join you want, it's useful to just play around and instantly see changes in your data in the summary pane to the right, the profile pane. But I'm pretty good with this inner join for now. All right. Joins. Yeah, and the gotcha there is sometimes Prep Builder doesn't select the right join clauses, especially when you know your data. Make sure that you're joining on the right fields so you get the right data out. All right. So we covered unions and joins. So one issue is potentially jagged unions, which we covered. You can just click that mismatched union fields to figure out what's not quite matching and make sure you have the right join clause. This is my favorite part. Last year at TC, me and a co-presenter and myself gave a talk on how to aggregate friends and influence pivots. It was probably the most popular talk at TC that year. and my colleague Stephen McDonald covered aggregations and I covered pivots. There's not quite enough time to fully explain what aggregations and especially pivots are in this presentation, so I'm going to move pretty fast. We will talk about, or if you're interested in learning more, please do come by the Data Village and we can talk more and demo for you. Start with a quote. Aggregations are the gathering of data expressed in summary form, resulting in increased clarity through the reduction of level of detail. And what that actually means is when you have a lot of data and you just want a quick high-level summary, you have the option to apply aggregation calculations to each field you're interested in to kind of sum it up. So instead of having seven rows in my data on the left here, I just want to see a high-level overview. So I apply aggregations on each of these columns, and then I can see in the north I have 3 sellers with 4 sales IDs for a total sales amount of $430. So aggregations are really just reducing the level of detail, but providing a useful summary when they're done correctly. And then pivots. Pivot by any other name would be functionally equivalent. That's by me. In Prep Builder, in Tableau, we call pivots pivots, but other software calls the same operation unpivot, meld, merge. There's a variety of names in the industry. More recently, we've clarified our wording to just say one operation is moving your data from columns to rows or rows to columns. And I'll show you an animated representation of what that operation looks like. But for the most part, the general definition that we give out is sometimes your data has a lot of fields, a lot of columns, but not too many rows. And in some analysis, it's more useful to have not a lot of columns, but many rows. So moving from tall and wide to, short and wide to tall and skinny data. And what I mean by that is, let's say you just had this data. It's not too wide, there's only a few columns, but if you wanted to reorganize this so you had, you didn't have the year numbers in the column headers, but instead in the actual rows of your data, you would perform a pivot operation. This animation I'm about to show you doesn't exist in the product. I had a UI friend of mine cook it up, so I'm required to tell you it doesn't actually exist in the product. But it looks like this. You actually select your data, drop it into the pivot, and the data changes from columns to rows. One more time because it's so cool. Oops. Columns to rows. Nice. So what does that mean for our Thanksgiving recipes? Well, for the ratings I brought in, it looks like there's ratings over 9 years, and I don't want to use 9 different ratings to determine which recipe to cook with. I could just use the latest year, but I kind of want to pull in all that information maybe by averaging it. I could just write a calculated expression that was huge, or what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pivot that data and then aggregate all the year ratings into an averaged amount. I do that by adding a pivot, dragging the rating fields into this pivot area. You can see right here that it's going from columns to rows. If I wanted a different type of pivot, I could switch it here. Prep Builder automatically detects common naming in the column headers, so it automatically named the pivot values excuse me, to ratings. And I'm going to rename the pivot names to rating year. And now I have all my ratings in kind of its own field. I'm going to aggregate these ratings by adding an aggregate step. And just bringing in, how about the recipe name and the rating value. It looks like by default the aggregation for ratings is sum, and I don't want to sum them all up. I just want to find the average, so I change it here. Do a little bit of rewiring. And now I have ratings included with everything else. Awesome. That will be useful for my analysis. Oops. All right, some gotchas. I covered aggregates and pivots at light speed. So for aggregations, since you've already used Tableau, you know picking the right aggregation is key, and knowing what it does is important to getting useful answers from your data. So it's important to know what each aggregation operation does before you use it. And then, yeah, be sure, pivots can be a little bit complex too. Be sure you're pivoting the right way from columns to rows or rows to columns as needed. Finally, sharing your data. So that's about all the changes I wanted to make with my data. What next? How do I get it into Tableau? Well, I'm going to add an output step, and now I have options. I can save the output locally as a CSV. I can also save it as a TDE or an optimized hyper extract, so it's optimized for Tableau. I can publish it as a data source to a server if I'm signed in up here. I also have the option to publish the flow to a Tableau server and run the flow online. Now that's called Tableau Prep Conductor, and you can schedule flows to run online so your outputs always have the latest set of data. That won't be covered in this presentation, but it's very useful, and I worked on that, so I'm pretty proud of that. But yeah, so I could just save this locally to here, run the flow, and then all my values, I've run this flow before, all my values of data are now in that hyper file, ready to be pulled into Tableau. One gotcha is, as I kind of said in the beginning, sampling does not apply to the number of rows outputted. So while you might have, let's say, 1,000 rows showing up in each step, like the summary for each step, the output might have millions of rows. That's because sampling was just giving you only a subset until the final output, which performs your operations on your entire data set. today we covered so many recipes. Looks like we got turkey, mashed potato, pumpkin pie, all the good stuff. But really we covered exploring your data, so searching and sorting, binning, finding outliers quickly, which is important. So like that 20-hour recipe, definitely didn't want that. Cleaning your data, so we removed columns, we split columns to calculate total time. Calculated fields, the fuzzy clustering, group and replace. Integrating your data, so union and joins are very popular. Shaping your data, pivots and aggregations, and then sharing your data. So, if you're interested in learning more, please come visit us at the data kiosk. We'd be very interested in doing demos for you and talking about the product. And then there are further related talks. Technically, this is the 101 Tableau prep talk. There's another 201 prep talk, and I'll provide information on the actual location and times in a slide or two. Also, best practices for flow performance and Tableau data management in action. And then if you want to get started right away, you can download the trial here. And also, in preparing for this presentation, the help was amazing, especially the help videos. They're prepared by my friend Ariel, and she is very good at explaining Tableau prep. If you have a second right now, please take a second and open up your apps and review this session. I'd love to have your data. Let me know how I did, and let me know what I can improve for next year. Or if you don't want me to come back next year, please let me know, I guess. But yeah, just in your app, I guess you go under My Evaluations, and you can rate me there. And then there is another repeat of this session. If you haven't had enough of Thanksgiving recipes, tomorrow from 4 to 5. Related sessions, advanced prep features would be tomorrow. Best practices for flow performance and data prep would be today, and it already happened, so you'll have to look at a review video. And then data management in action is tomorrow from 11 to 12. Oops. I'll go back real quick for you to take a picture of that slide too. All right. Okay, thank you. My name is Issa Beacon, and you've been great. If you have any questions, please come up to the front. We have a microphone, and thanks.